So price elasticity of demand is defined as the percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. Price elasticity of demand gives us a measure, a statistic, a metric that shows us how sensitive consumers are to a price change. Demand that is highly elastic indicates that consumers are very responsive, very sensitive to a price change. Demand that is inelastic demonstrates a demand in which consumers are insensitive or non-responsive to a price change. So what we'd like to do now is to demonstrate how to calculate and interpret price elasticity of demand. Here we have a very simple demand curve, a linear demand curve, and there are 2 points that have been identified. Let's label these points point A and point B, and let's suppose that point A is consistent with a price of $5 and a quantity of 9 units. Point B is consistent with a price of $7 and a quantity of 7 units. So with this information, we can now compute price elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand, again, is defined as the percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. So let's start with the percent change in quantity demanded. We're using what is called the midpoint approach, or the midpoint formula for computing elasticity. So the way we do that is we're going to start with our percent change in quantity demanded. And we simply look at the two quantities we have here, 7 and 9, and we know that the difference between the two is 2 units. So the change in quantity is 2 units. And then we measure the midpoint, or we could just call it the average. The average of 7 and 9 is 8. 7 plus 9 is 16. 16 divided by 2 is 8. And so the average, or the midpoint for the quantity, is 8. This gives us a percent change in quantity of 2/8 or 1/4. So this is the numerator of our formula. Percent change in quantity is 1/4, or in decimal form that would be 0.25. We now move to the percent change in price. We see that price changes from 5 to 7, or 7 to 5, depending on which direction you want to look. So the percent change in price is the change in price, which is $2. Again, we divide that by the midpoint, or the average. 7 plus 5 is 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. And so the percent change in price is 2/6, or 1/3. So percent change in price is 1/3. So price elasticity of demand is equal to 1/4 divided by 1/3. That collapses, or that simplifies to 3/4, or in decimal form 0.75. Now, because demand is a negative relationship, that is, when price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, we know that this elasticity statistic must be a negative number. So price elasticity of demand for this demand curve, at least over this range from A to B, is negative 0.75. Negative 0.75. And again, that negative sign reflects the negative demand relationship between price and quantity demanded. Now, how do we interpret this number? How do we interpret this statistic of negative 0.75? Well, first, we know that this represents an inelastic demand. An inelastic demand. Why? because the absolute value, this symbol, the two vertical bars, the absolute value of price elasticity of demand is less than 1. 0.75 is less than 1. That tells us that the percent change in quantity demanded is less than the percent change in price. Consumers are relatively insensitive to a price change. So this is a good in which the demand is price inelastic. Consumers are insensitive, fairly non-responsive to a price change. We can interpret this statistic in a more mathematical approach. We can say that for every 1 percentage point change in the price of the good, quantity demanded will change by 0.75 percentage points in the opposite direction. So let's take an example. If price rises by 10%, what will happen to quantity demanded? We know it will fall. That's the negative relationship that demand represents. Quantity demanded will fall by how much? It will fall by 10% times our elasticity statistic, 0.75. So quantity demanded will fall by 7.5%. 7.5%. We could take this a step further. If price were to increase by 100%, we know that quantity demanded would fall by 75%. Notice that the percent change in quantity is less than the percent change in price. We have a price inelastic demand.